From the Oklahoman newsroom, this is an OU update. I'm Jenny Carlson here with OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Ryan, Tuesday morning breaks and breaking news that Trae Young is headed to the NBA draft. We had long assumed that this was likely the case, that this was going to happen. What do we know at this point about his decision to leave Oklahoma?
Well, Trae Young wrote a first-person, like a Players Tribune type story for ESPN, told to Adrian Wojnarowski, of course, the great NBA reporter for ESPN, and basically said it's one of those things that he thought he would be at Oklahoma for longer. I think all of us thought that this was going to be a 2-year deal starting off, but as the season went on, it became more and more apparent that, one, he was ready for the NBA, and two, that he was going to have to go to the NBA to escape and find a little bit more freedom of movement when you talk about the way that opposition defenses handled Trae Young as the year went on.
What stood out to you about what he said? I mean, I think a lot of what he talked about, what you're saying, you know, with the desire to, you know, sort of escape some of the defensive pressure that was put on him, that was mentioned and talked about in that essay. But what else stood out to you about his decision? Anything notable? You've covered this guy all year.
Well, I think that some of the regret about not advancing farther in the NCAA tournament. He talked about Buddy Hield and Blake Griffin and Wayman Tisdale and what their legacies meant to OU and how much he wanted to join those guys as players who took Oklahoma to the Elite Eight, to the Final Four. He wasn't able to accomplish that. They started off just on fire, made it up to number 4 in the country before things sort of fell apart. They wound up playing well in their NCAA tournament game, but falling to Rhode Island in overtime. Just I think the regret about that maybe is a little bit of what stood out.
You know, you mentioned that it did sound like, you know, Trae Young saying that he expected to be there a couple years, to have maybe 2 opportunities to get, you know, Oklahoma maybe to the Final Four. Only doing a year. I have to think that his thinking was probably the thinking of the coaching staff too. So where does this leave Oklahoma? They obviously have some guys returning, but what about that point guard position now, Ryan?
Well, it becomes an area of focus quickly. They would like to get a graduate transfer point guard or a short-term solution in there. They feel pretty good about Davion Harmon, their 2019 point guard commit. Having him there, he was sort of the guy who was recruited to replace Trae Young. As the year went on and it became apparent that Trae Young was going to leave, they did shift their focus a little bit. They got in on a 5-star point guard from New Jersey, weren't quite able to lure him to Norman. They've got Jamal Bieniemy from next year is more of a combo guard. They'd like him to play off the ball, but if necessary, he could play on it. Obviously, they've got Jordan Shepherd, who took some steps forward this year, but didn't show the kind of consistency that they'd like to be the number 1 guy. So I would imagine Oklahoma, or I know Oklahoma, is going to go strong after a graduate transfer point guard to try to get a 1 or 2 year stopgap in there before Davion Harmon arrives.
And obviously there's evidence that the stopgap could be pretty good. We see it right up the road at Oklahoma State. Kendall Smith, starting point guard for Oklahoma State as a grad transfer. So stopgap, yes, but could get a pretty good player there too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen Oklahoma hasn't gone the graduate transfer route very often, although they did with Tayshaun Thomas a few years ago, had some real success there. They really went after Igor Kulichev hard. He wound up going to Florida, had a big impact for their NCAA tournament team. So you can get graduate transfers who can come in and be a quick impact, especially guys who are coming from a little bit lower level, the mid-major and below levels, who have proven that they can play beyond that. I think those are some guys to watch as well. All
right, we'll have lots more on Trae Young's departure to the NBA draft and where this leads Oklahoma in the coming days. So be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.